Just a reminder, it's a hot day, so we've got the doors open, and we will be having a comfort break halfway through, so I hope that's okay for everybody. So, apologies for absence. I would like to thank Super Sub Dan and Super Sub Marion, who are covering for Stephen and Demola. And then on the opposite side, we have Councillor Spring isn't here, and we've got George in for Wayne, and then we've got Leanna Rogers. Apologies. Okay, has everybody had a chance to look at the minutes of the last meeting? We're on item 2. Can I sign those as correct? Thank you, everybody. And then we'll go on to item 3, urgent matters. I have none. Anybody else? None? Okay, brilliant. Item 4, disposable pecuniary interests. Anybody? No? Okay, brilliant. Right, so this starts us on to the main reason we're here this evening is the housing theme. So we'll have a presentation and then 3 papers, and the officers are in attendance. So thank you, Bex. Thank you, Nicolette and James, for being here. So our presentation follows reports A5 to AC. And we start with A5, Medway's children and family placed in temporary accommodation. And we have 30 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Bex Wilcox. I'm the Chief Housing Officer, and I'm going to briefly go over our children and families placed in temporary accommodation at present. Is that better? Is that better? Thank you. If you can move the slide on, please, James. Thank you. So the current picture at the moment, so these figures are as of the 22nd of May this year. So as a local authority and a housing service, we have the responsibility to provide interim temporary accommodation while we investigate somebody's homelessness, and temporary accommodation if we find we've got a main duty for them. So the number of households that we have currently got as of the 22nd of May with at least one dependent child in was 482. So this is actually 79% of our households in temporary accommodation, which is actually higher than the national average. So we've got quite a number of households with dependents. 83 of these placements, that's 400 of those 482, are actually placed in Medway, with the remaining households placed in Kent. So that's most of our households remain in Medway. And yesterday I got advised I am now below 10% of our households in total that are outside of Medway. So that's a really big thing for us. We are retaining our Medway residents in Medway. As of the 22nd, we did have 999 dependent children in temporary accommodation. That's about an average of 2.07 children per household. And the average stay in temporary accommodation is just over a year. The longest we have is 5 years. So it really depends, varying on the size of the household. We have less than 5 care leavers, and I'm pleased to say that's reduced by at least one since I published these papers. So I'm really pleased about that as well. And we have no use of bed and breakfast for more than 6 weeks. And we still haven't used for over a year now bed and breakfast for anyone with a dependent child. Again, this is a really positive thing because a lot of the London boroughs and larger areas have got children in B&B. Next slide, please. Okay, so around the analysis, advice and action that we do as part of a statutory homelessness service is, big key thing is prevention. And it's about preventing any households going into temporary accommodation. So last year we increased the number of frontline resources to our housing options team. That helped us to prevent nearly 300 more households going into temporary accommodation. We do cross-directorate training with Children's Service, and this is including around the joint housing assessment. We are opening our front door later this month, which will allow actual households to approach. Again, we haven't had that since pre-COVID. We have a specialist housing advisor that works within the 16 plus team, so that works alongside, sits in 16 plus teams, but works alongside my frontline services. And we have a joint housing and young people meetings to discuss those really complex cases. Move on. So we've got a newly created Move On team. They started in April of this year, and they are concentrating on long-term TA placements at the moment, and the idea is it's a dedicated team looking to supporting those families out of temporary accommodation, because that's one of our big issues at the moment. We've also launched One Medway Lettings. This is our social lettings agency, soft launch last year. We did another big launch last month, our landlord forum, and we've currently got 12 properties in our portfolio, and all 12 properties have been able to house families with dependent children, including 3 large families that have been waiting for over 3 years to be moved on. So that's really important. Another way of moving on both our families and our care leavers is through something called a local lettings plan. So this is for any social housing provider new build. We will work alongside that provider or our own tenant services team to create a mixed tenure as you go into those properties. So this will look at including a number of properties allocated for care leavers, or a vacating empty property from a move into that property being allocated to a care leavers. One of our most successful is 4 properties out towards Who with West Kent Housing Association. Another big win for Medway Council and also for the Ministry and Medway Housing is the Sunrise Foyer over in Luton. So that's a number of bed spaces for young adults and so under 25s that are at risk of homelessness. One of the big things for us is, and the graph's not particularly great up on the screen, but in your papers, this graph shows the number of households that are waiting for a property. So this does include families, singles, couples and care leavers, and the number of properties we've had available in the last year. So the orange is the number of properties we've let this year. The navy blue is the number of people and households waiting for those properties. And as you can see, the larger the property, we've reached 0 in the last year. Thank you.
Turn this on. Don't think my voice is that strong tonight. I'm Nicoletta Stango. I'm corporate head of service for corporate parenting and youth justice here in Medway, and I will be presenting the second report for this evening. Obviously, as corporate parents, we all corporate parents around this table, our corporate parenting principles underpin our day-to-day engagement, support, and the intervention that we offer to our children in care and care leavers. As included in my report, there are a number of key pieces of legislation that govern our duties to support our care leavers with their preparation to independent living. So one of those is about making sure that they are appropriately housed, and we're supporting them to get ready to have their own tenancies. In March, and I think we've maintained the same figure up to date, we had 202 care leavers that are supported by our 16+ service. There are a number of accommodation types that we are providing for our care leavers, one being staying put, which allows them to remain living with a foster carer up until the age of 21. And I think that is a really positive way forward for our young people, because they remain and they can be supported by the foster carers to further develop those independent living skills. Shared lives, which is specifically for our care leavers with special needs, supported accommodation that can be offered through our housing, so we have 2 foyers, or through, we can outsource those through external providers. We have our supported homes that is provided internally through our fostering service, and also private and social housing tenancies through our colleagues in housing. And we also see young people returning to live home with their families or friends. In March, we had 25 care leavers who were living in supported accommodation that were funded by Children's Social Services. And there is quite a strong kind of focus from the service, from our colleagues in housing, our finance and commissioning colleagues, to ensure that we support our care leavers to leave this supported accommodation and just secure accommodation that is more suitable and stable for them. Alongside that, I think we realize that our care leavers, sometimes they're not ready to live independently, and sometimes they don't understand what the housing options are for them. Therefore, as part of our 16+ service, we have a specialist housing advisor who supports our young people, not just with training and having one-to-one conversation with them, but looking at actually what do you need in order for you to be able to secure your own tenancy. It is about having those conversations prior to them moving, and actually after they move into their own home, in order to ensure that they keep that tenancy going and they're not at risk of becoming homeless. We start in very early, from when they're 15 and a half, to look at the independent booklet to make sure that foster carers and providers support them to develop those independent living skills. So when they reach 18 and they can move into their own accommodation, they know how to use a washing machine, how to cook, and I think that is work in progress, and we're looking at the booklet and we're looking at developing that even further with input from our young people. We're also making sure that there is a set-in home grant, so when they have their own tenancy, we support them to buy those basic items to furnish and white goods. There's also a council tax exemption for our care leavers who live in Medway and outside Medway, because sometimes we acknowledge that financially they need that ongoing support, as any of our children would, really, so we need to be there as good parents. And I think as a result of the very close working partnership that we have with our colleagues in housing, commissioning, and our finance colleagues, in March, 96 of our care leavers were assessed to be living in suitable accommodation, which I think is something to be celebrated. Next slide, please. So obviously we can't be complacent. We just need to continue remaining very ambitious for our care leavers. And there are a number of areas that we need to continue to focus on. We need to ensure that they experience stability and suitable accommodation, no matter where they live, whether they are in Medway or outside Medway. We need to continue to address the accommodation needs for our young people with complex needs, because shared care arrangements, they're very good, but obviously there is a gap in the market. Supporting young people to return to Medway and be supported to access housing here, because I think if they are what we've experienced, our young people living outside Medway, I think is sometimes difficult to secure that long-term accommodation for them. In terms of next steps, I think we need to continue doing what we're doing well already, just to continue working in partnership with our colleagues in Housing, Finance, Commissioning. We need to continue with our monthly move-on plans that Bex also mentioned. I think that is an opportunity for us to sit down with our colleagues and look at, actually, this is the cohort of young people that we have. What else can we do creatively for them to move them on and for them to have that stable accommodation going forward. It is about increasing use of in-house supported homes, and I know our colleagues in fostering, they are relentlessly recruiting to make sure that we increase that cohort of carers, and also to increase the number of young people who remain living with their foster carers under stay put arrangements. Also to advocate for our young people to make sure that they are housed in suitable accommodation, and to promote our Young Inspectors Programme, which I think James is going to talk a bit more about, because it's good to hear that our young people want to be involved in that. They want to go out there and see what's the quality of that, and it's about them being involved and having a voice and telling us what is good enough and what is not.
Hi everybody, for those of you that don't know me, James Harmon, Head of Children's Services, Commissioning and Placement. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the third strand of this presentation that we're talking about today. So quality assurance, when I'm talking about quality assurance within this presentation, I'm talking about quality assurance of provisions that support our children and young people, rather than quality assurance of case files and those sorts of things. So we've got a dedicated quality assurance team, small but beautiful, who will advocate for those children who are in care and in accommodation, making sure that we don't have any drops in standards in any of the providers that we use. That often makes us unpopular, but it can also be very supportive for providers, for us to effectively give them advice and guidance on how they can improve, how they can get through Ofsted, how they can sort of become a primary provider. So we run a provider sanctions list. We've got a list of providers that we won't use. That's a mixture of people that Ofsted have informed us are not suitable to use, we ourselves have embargoed, or indeed there's intelligence from the LADO or the police or somebody else that an investigation is underway, therefore it's not appropriate for us to use those organisations at the moment. It's quite an extensive list, as you can imagine. It does run nationally, but that is something we're monitoring every week to say, actually, you know, are we going to add people to that list? Have they done appropriate work to be able to step down that list? We've got a list of providers or on action plans that we work with the providers with to try and improve their quality, because what we don't want to do is just shut off all our options at one time. We do want to support providers where there might be gaps in knowledge or quality. We do hold providers to account. We have some very difficult conversations with them around standards of care, around practice, around standards of reporting, and we always feed that back to those providers, because again, it's about their improvement journey as well as making sure our children and young people get the best. We work very closely in partnership, not just within Children's Services, but across the council, housing colleagues, LADO colleagues, police, fire and rescue, all of those things. We try and get that evidence and intelligence to be able to inform what we do around quality assurance. A quality assurance visit for us can be done virtually, but usually in person. We've got a really robust quality assurance framework, which has got 74 points of quality markers on it. That could be anything from us dip testing staff files to see if they've got the appropriate training certificates that the provider's saying. It could be it involves walking around the house to look for things that are not right or need improving, and look for things like ligature marks if we've got a young person that potentially has got some underlying sort of neurodiverse issues or mental health issues. Looking at their policies and processes, dip testing into incident reports, all of those things. So it should capture all of those different elements, from the physical to the staffing to the ethos of the home. And we track all of that intelligence, as I say, so it's ready, and we've got a file for every single provider that we've ever used or might use. So just a few key facts about what we do around quality assurance. As you can see, some of the volumes of inquiries and notifications we get are very high. So 662 in the last financial year, nearly 200 Ofsted notifications, and Leanne can attest that Ofsted send us a huge amount of notifications a week. Some require action, some are just for noting, some require responses, so we manage that on behalf of the council to make sure that we're meeting our obligations to Ofsted. There's only 4 professionals in there at the moment, but they do a really good job and work really hard at keeping our children and young people safe and in good comedy provision. Talked about embargoes. We've been recognised not just in kind of Ofsted inspections, but also now by Regional Care Cooperative and indeed colleagues in Jersey, that some of the models of practice we've got in place and the framework and the detail that we go into is seen as best practice now, which we're really, really proud of. And there's always things that we can improve on. One part of the pilot project that we're running with Jersey at the moment is we will quality assure their provisions for their young people as well. So they've invested in the council to say, actually, we think you can do this better than we can at this present point in time. Can you teach us how to do this in the future? But actually, in the interim, can you go out and make sure our children and young people are safe? Regional Care Cooperative, similar. We've done various presentations at Regional Care Cooperative meetings, and we're currently in discussions as to whether we can provide some advice and guidance to the other 15 local authorities involved in that about rolling out some of those things. So it's not about doing it for them, it's about passing on that learning and upskilling and the tools that we've got. And then the sort of final bit, which just to give you an idea of kind of volumes, we do over 100 face-to-face quality assurance visits a year. Which is a significant amount. We've gone as far as Scotland, as wide as Wales, and also all the ones local as well. So there's an awful lot of work that's involved in getting out there and making sure that it's good quality provision, that it's value for money, and they're doing what they say they're doing. So the last part, I just want to talk a little bit about Young Inspectors Programme. I think I mentioned it at the last Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So like Nicoletta said, we were really keen to involve into that QA work more of the young person's voice. So we will, where possible, speak to the young people when we visit. Sometimes they won't want to speak to us, sometimes they do. They don't have to, but we try and encourage them to do that because, again, that's a really important part of understanding what happens in the home. What do they think of staff? What do staff allow them to do and not to do? More importantly, linked to the stuff that Bex and Nicoletta have been talking about as well, it's around those mainly 16 plus provisions that we know children and young people are moving onto and into. So we devised a Young Inspectors Programme, ourselves and colleagues in Nicoletta's team, where we're running a pilot where we've got 4 care experienced young people who we've trained up and are now going out with us to some of the supported accommodation providers and giving us their views on what they see. They're better at speaking to the young people than we are, clearly, because they're relatively recent young care leavers. And actually, when we're looking at supported accommodation, it gives us some markers to look at. So not just as sort of seasoned professionals, actually the young people themselves going, oh, I really wouldn't like living here because that's there and they've got this door there and this room's tiny and all of those sorts of things. And it also means that we're upskilling care leavers in sort of supporting other young people like themselves. And we've had a really positive response from that first cohort of 4 young people around how they think that they're giving back, but also they're building their own skills and knowledge and, feeling like they've got a voice. So that pilot has literally just started after quite a few months of training. And that is about promoting positive change and making sure that we involve care leavers in the future of our children and young people. So I'll probably leave it there for now, if that's okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, Bex, Nicorette and James. Now, although we've had the presentations together, I'm going to do the discussion separately. So the first discussion is about children and families placed in temporary accommodation, and the pages relevant in your notes are 17 to 26. Any questions from the floor? Okay, Mark, Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. Just with looking at some of the numbers you've given, you're now saying that we've dropped down 10% of households with dependent children living in temporary accommodation outside of Medway, with the rest remaining in Kent. I just wondered, with regards to Kent, that parts of Kent are over 50 miles away, and obviously moving, especially with children with schools. When you say Kent, is that Kent that's just around Medway, or is this potentially up into Thanet and potentially down to like New Romney? And the second thing was, with your graph, I just wondered how many social housing properties are coming onto the market each year. So you've shown us the numbers that are on the register. We've got over 3,000 people on that. How many have been getting accommodation? But is there enough houses coming on that we can maybe get this backlog down in the near future? Thank you.
Okay, Bex, thanks.
We, out of the placements that are within the Kent area, primarily they are in Gravesham, Tunbridge and Malling, Swale or Maidstone. We have a couple that are a little bit further afield than that, but our primary aim, and it's something that Medway are really proud of, is that we aim to keep households with dependent children, unless they're at risk of there's domestic abuse. We have 34 families that are out of Medway that can't return because of that. We will place in Medway where we can. It's limited to the availability of the properties on that day. I would love to say that all the temporary accommodation that exists in Medway is offered to Medway Council. First of all, that's not always the case. So we will go with what we have on the day when we're placing, because we won't hold properties because of the cost associated with that. We locate on the day when a household becomes homeless. With regards to the number of properties coming through, I will come back to you with the exact figure, but the graph does include any new builds that did come on last year. And the answer is no, there's not enough. But that's not a Medway issue, that's a national issue about the delivery of affordable housing. But I will come back to you with the exact figures that we've got, and I can break down that, including the council property delivery we've got coming through this year and the next few years as well.
Thanks, Bex. Adrian?
Thank you, Joe, and thank you very much for the report. It was very good to hear that we've not got any of Medway families in temporary accommodation outside of Kent. And I think that's very important, because the further you move people away, they lose their connections with friends and family, and life is going to be much more difficult for them. But unfortunately, there's a lot of other councils around us who don't seem to be doing so well at that. And I'm particularly perturbed at the quality of some of that accommodation. There's accommodation at the lower end of New Road, not far from Luton Arches. There's actually subterranean. All people have got is a little skylight down at pavement level with all that traffic thundering by. It really is appalling accommodation. It would be interesting to know how many S208 notifications that we've had. If you haven't got them at the top of your head now, please don't worry. Perhaps we could have an informative to the whole committee sometime later. That would be really good. Before I finish, I must say, as a private landlord myself, and having been that for nearly 40 years, I think successive governments have not helped because they've treated private landlords as pariahs. Yes, there's a few bad eggs there, I'll fully accept that. But the vast majority of people who are letting good quality properties. But successive governments have not made it worthwhile. What worries me is in the future there will be less and less people who will become private landlords because it's just too onerous. And as I found out to my cost, as well as there being bad landlords, there's bad tenants as well. And unfortunately, I ended up with a bad tenant and had to spend, I think it was just over £32,000 to get the property back into livable and good quality accommodation again. So it's a double-edged sword there with that. But generally speaking, though, I think this is a very positive report, and I thank you for that.
I can answer the question on Section 208. So the Section 208 relates to the section in the Housing Act 1996, which requires a placing housing authority to notify the placement authority that they've placed a household in temporary accommodation. You may have known, not seen, that the Deputy Prime Minister has also done a ministerial letter around this. So in the last 12 months, we've had 475 Section 208s received. 221 of those are London boroughs. The highest borough is Bromley. And then we've had 236 from other Kent authorities, with Thanet being our highest placer for households. So this is any type of household, so single couples and families with non-dependent, with dependent children, I beg your pardon. We are not confident that these are the correct figures. We do our Section 208s when we place, but we can't guarantee that these placements are correct. And this data is about 10 days old. And the day I asked for this data from my team, Greenwich had just sent through 17 placements, so that were 6 weeks old. So it's raising that awareness that actually the Section 208 is a statutory requirement. But we can't guarantee that the figures I've given you are correct. With regards to, I'm going to do it. So One Medway Lettings is a positive example of how we're supporting private sector landlords in Medway. So this is a product that we're offering where we guarantee the rent, we look after the tenants, and we place our TA household members into these properties. But yeah, we're trying to do a lot more as a local authority to promote positivity around private sector accommodation, because it is key for part of our move on.
Thank you. Leah, Douglas, Marion, then George.
Hey, so out of area placements is my absolute favourite topic. So one of my first questions was obviously the fact that we don't use B&B placements for longer than 6 weeks is great, but I wondered, when it is, well, the end of that 6 weeks is coming and it's looking, the only options are out of area, are families then given the option that they can remain in that B&B longer rather than being placed out of area? And then I had another question on out of areas. And then whether there was scope for once families are placed out of area. And I think it's great that it's less than 10%, but just those that do fall within that, is there then scope for them to talk about moving back as properties do become available? And then I think my other ones are about care leavers. I don't know whether to do that now or whether to do it in accommodation, because it's about care leavers. I'll do it and you guys can decide when to answer. So the care leavers who are in temporary accommodation, I kind of wondered around the parity, because if it's such a small percentage of them, why has that happened there? So when care leavers approach, how are we ensuring there's kind of equality of the way that they access the service, I guess?
So with B&B placements, we haven't had a household with children in B&B for over a year. It's statutory, it's code of guidance that if we do have to place a household with dependent children, that they need to be moved out in 6 weeks. We will do our hardest to find a property in Medway in those 6 weeks. If it's interim accommodation, there is less requirement to be suitable first off, but if it's temporary accommodation under main duty, so where we have a main duty to find alternative accommodation, we will have to ensure that accommodation, while temporary, needs to be suitable for that household's needs. With regards to our out-of-area placements, we still hold the statutory duty to house, so therefore what we do is we either move them back into Medway into temporary accommodation, or we secure alternative settled accommodation within Medway. We do have a small proportion of households that can't return to Medway, and we will place them where they feel safe to be placed. But yeah, everyone's entitled to come back because we're the placing local authority with the statutory duty. So yeah, that answers the returns. With regards to the care leavers approaching, I think one of the positive things is at one point we had a significant number of care leavers in temporary accommodation, and so housing have worked really closely with the 16 plus team to significantly reduce that. There were at one point, you know, double figures of care leavers in temporary accommodation. So we have the joint housing assessment. We also have the 16 plus housing advisor that works with our service to sort of prevent that requirement for temporary accommodation. So we'll try and find those housing pathways without using temporary accommodation. This is one of the lowest numbers of care leavers that we've had in temporary accommodation because of the co-working across our service areas, and obviously we continue to do that because the aim is to significantly reduce, if I can, eliminate the requirement for temporary accommodation. But there are some complex cases that will require TA from time to time.
Yeah, quick.
I've realised my other question that I had later, but I think fits better here actually, is just how closely, for some of those families in temporary accommodation, how closely children's services and housing works. Obviously, quite often once you're in temporary accommodation, actually the needs are quite complex. I wondered how well the two teams can work together and kind of do a wraparound for those families. Is it for temporary accommodation placed by other local authorities in Medway, or we place in other local authorities? So it was a wider thing around housing, but actually all of that. I wasn't so much thinking about out-of-area placements, but as you've raised it, those answers would be great too.
So obviously, if we have a family who's being placed out of the area by housing on a TA agreement, then if we're already involved, we will notify that local authority. We will send a referral and say this family is known to us on a child in need, on a child protection plan, and we will ensure that there is a transfer process so they assume responsibility for looking after that family. And similarly, if there's a family from Bromley being placed with us, then the same process will apply. So we ensure that there is that joint working agreement.
And with regards to sort of working collaboratively with families that are, so if there is a family that is known to both our service and children's services, we will support that family when we're required and vice versa. And then if a family, why in temporary accommodation, requires that front door support, we will then be part of that. But the staff visit, we have to complete risk assessments when we place any household, and if there are any concerns or anything, we will increase those visits to that household. So the idea is that because we've got corporate parent responsibilities, safeguarding responsibilities, that still remains even if we place in temporary accommodation.
If I can quickly, that bit around the placing authorities, are we finding quite often that those families, obviously once it's statutorily known to children's services, I know they have to inform us. I'm wondering if there is any evidence that the families that are being placed here are already known to early help or just pre-statutory services and then being placed here in the hope that we then pick up that.
I think without without looking at those particular cases, it's very difficult to say whether there's a theme or not. So it will be maybe an exercise that we could do to look at that. But I think if there is a housing need, it doesn't necessarily mean that there should have been some prior involvement. It might be someone just fleeing domestic abuse and they've done the right thing and they've asked for support and they're being helped to move somewhere else. So, yeah.
Thank you. Douglas.
Thank you very much for the report. Very, very important information packed in there. I've got two questions, really. One of them is to praise the report, which I've done. The issue around retaining accommodation for Medway residents, I think you quoted just under 10%. Was that the figure?
For out of borough,
Out of
area placements is just under 10%
yes,
now. Yeah,
absolutely. So my question is, how can we then use that as a benchmark moving forward? And what things can you do to, I understand there's pressure from outside other boroughs trying to get placements within Medway. What are you doing to stem that tide? Are there any statute instruments that we can do instead of having these just-in-time placements that seem to put pressure across the whole health and social care ecosystem? What can we put in place to prevent them trying to do that just-in-time model? And the second question is around quality assurance, if I may. There was 662 different inquiries and issues overseen by the team. Can you break that down? Because there's a big difference between an inquiry and an issue. Are there any themes emerging with that data, and what will be done about any themes that are emerging from that? And will we get a report around the breakdown of those issues? Thank you.
Douglas, can that wait to see? Thank you. James. Sorry, Bex.
Okay, so with returning accommodation, so what we're doing, one of the big things we're doing is last year we were given a significant capital investment and we're in the process of purchasing hopefully up to about 190 properties. So that will be our own temporary accommodation managed by our own team, managed by our repairs and maintenance and compliancy streams. So that will allow us to control who goes into those placements and how we use those placements. With regards to sort of stemming the tide of out-of-borough placements, that one is much larger than a Medway issue. Out-of-area placements happen because Medway has had historically a lower rental rate. That's not the case now. We're finding our private sector rental market shifting quite significantly. And also there's a number of, they're known as rent-to-rent providers. So these are providers that are using accommodation that may have previously been standard private sector accommodation, and they're taking those and they're offering much bigger return on the rental than a standard rental would be, and there's no responsibility to offer them to the local authority, the placement local authority. They can offer them to whoever they want to, which is an issue. We are looking at how we can do some provision around how we can look at particular providers working with us and about how we can look at negotiating some better rates than what we're doing. The other reason why we have to do just-in-time placements is that on average each placement costs the local authority £25 a night. So we won't hold placements because that will involve paying for placements that we don't require on the day. But what we can do is we can plan. So we might know that someone has had a prevention duty, and at the end of the 56 days that we have to prevent that, if it's looking like we can't prevent it, we will look for temporary accommodation for the day that we know that they will require that. So that allows us to access that market then, because we'll have a couple of days running up to it. But if we've got someone who's homeless on the day, which is still a significant problem for Medway, is we will have to place where we can find a place on that day. Yes, that's why, and ultimately the big thing is about prevention. So the more households that as a housing service we can prevent from becoming homeless the significant reduction in reliance on temporary and interim accommodation. So that's our main aim, along with our strategies as well, is to prevent homelessness in the first place. So the earlier we get involved with a household that's at risk of homelessness, the more likely it is we'll be able to prevent that homelessness.
Thank you. Marion?
Thank you. And thank you for your report. It was really, really informative. I have a few questions. To be honest, some of them were already answered about Section 208 and another one. You mentioned that we're gonna get a new supply of housing, around 140 houses with the investment. Still looking at the numbers, we have over 3,000 households on the waiting list and only around 700 social housing let per year. So it's not gonna really solve the problem. It's gonna get us a bit there, but not gonna. Is there any other strategy that is being applied to get? I know it's a national issue, but we are better in Medway. We have to be better. The other question that I have is about larger families. I noticed that some of them are stuck in temporary accommodation for quite a long time. Is there any plan with this 140 units purchase, maybe to purchase larger houses that could accommodate larger families? Because you can imagine having 5 children being stuck in a 2-bedroom is not ideal. And final question about one Medway letting. I really, really love that idea. That's a great idea and we should support it. But I noticed that there have been only 11 properties delivered so far. Is there a plan to speed up the process so we can start delivering more? Thank you.
Okay, so the strategy is we're looking to purchase. It's about 198 if everything comes through. They will be exclusively for temporary accommodation. So they will be for households that require temporary accommodation in Medway, our placements. The build that's coming through is that we've got 44 properties due at the end of the summer that will be available for council tenants, so that will be on the waiting list. We've got a pipeline of HRA development which I can share, plus I can also share what's coming through from an enabling perspective. So that's our registered providers and the likes of MHS Homes that are also coming through over the next year or so. As housing professionals, we're just digesting today's spending review because there was a significant increase in potential funding for us. So we will be doing some looking at that and the aspect that we can gain for that. So we are moving as quickly as we can with the build process within the confinements of financial viability. With regards to the larger families, so one of the developments that the council is going to deliver next year does include a 6-bedroom property. As a local authority and and our registered providers, we have very limited numbers of 4+ bedroom properties in Medway. So one of the other things that we've been doing is looking at how we can encourage under-occupiers to move to smaller properties. So that's another way that across Medway we do that as well, as to how we can encourage that and what people are looking for when they want to downsize from the larger family homes. We do offer incentives as well. We're also looking at a very small number, but we are looking at a small number of larger TA provision because we do have some larger families in temporary accommodation. And the challenge around there is we don't have social housing units that are big enough. And then it's around the affordability of the larger properties in Medway. However, 3 of our largest families have been settled via one Medway lettings. We would love more properties. We're very open to taking more properties on, so that's what we're doing. We're starting to build up our communication and our marketing to get out there. So while we've only got 12 properties, those 12 properties have come on board since January of this year, and we will go out and keep going. So it's just picking the pace up with that. And I think some people are still concerned about how that will work. So it's around understanding the early adopters to coming into One Medway lettings. And it's just the fact that we just keep promoting it as a positive service for Medway residents, because we will guarantee there will be Medway residents that go into these One Medway lettings properties as well. I think that was everything.
Thank you. George.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Bex and the team for the presentation. My question is just regarding a couple of observations first. Obviously, I think it's positive, obviously, as you've referenced around the fact that we haven't got any children or young people currently placed within the B&B temporary accommodation, because I think certainly if you look at some of our colleagues in London boroughs, you know, with I might as well name names, you know, Newham, etc. You know, you read about the horror stories of the really, you know, poor accommodation, but also the extreme cost on local authorities. I mean, our temporary accommodation bill is sizable, yes, but I don't think anywhere near that of some of the London boroughs and some of the neighbours that are very close to us, which are, you know, extremely significant. And there was, I would urge colleagues to look. There was a exhibition recently which I saw about, which was being run by Shelter and IKEA at the Building Centre in London, where, you know, you could see the type of accommodation, B&B accommodation, that they've basically remodelled a room that others are parts of the UK where children and young people were living, and you know, this was inhumane to a certain extent, the conditions. And I think, you know, it's really positive, and you should be pleased that we've got, you know, a housing team in place that are ensuring that we're not having to have children and young people living in that type of accommodation. My question is just around, obviously we've got quite a sizable, above average by about 15%, the number of households that obviously have got at least one dependent child. I'm just wondering if you thought there's any reasons for that, and anything that you think, and given obviously the data is that we're talking in the hundreds, obviously I appreciate small numbers can sort of skew this, but just anything you think that we might want to be doing in order to sort of tackle that. And then just more generally, I'm just interested, coming back to a certain borough that I just referenced. Obviously there was all of the sort of news stories about, and I've just got the latest one in front of me around Anchorage House. I'm just interested in terms of where that is in terms of your conversations with the borough. I appreciate the previous portfolio holder was able to secure, obviously, some accommodation there for us. So just interested in terms of where that is, and any observations you had on that. Thank you.
So with the number of households with dependent children, it is significantly higher than the national average. And most of the families that we've got that are in temporary accommodation are main duty. So we have a legislative, you know, statutory requirement to move them on. The issue we've been having is finding that move on accommodation, so which is why we've created the move on team since April. One of their big aims is to support the move on of those families, and also One Medway lettings is very much concentrating. I mean, we will take any property type as long as it's affordable for us within One Medway lettings, but we've really concentrated on getting, you know, significantly larger families out, because we don't have that type of accommodation socially, but for social housing. But it's also about how we support those families that have been in there longer into settled accommodation, just because it is much healthier and happier for that household to do that. And we will continue to do that. I think the three main reasons to why Medway residents approach us are homeless is friends and family eviction. So, I mean, that peaked. Has always been a significant problem, but peaked post-COVID and during COVID. The other one is Section 21s. That is still a huge issue, and we are expecting to see a slight fluctuation in that as the Renters' Rights Bill goes through. And the third one, sadly, for Medway is domestic abuse. So we've just increased the number of domestic abuse specialist officers within the team. We've now got 2 officers and a triage officer working specifically with those households to support them to move into settled and safe accommodation. So we are doing more, and we are trying to be proactive, and we work along the sides of our children's hubs and the family services and the libraries and stuff to just sort of, it's to capture those trigger words. So we've been doing some training with the children's services around, they're not the standard trigger phones, you know, where it's like, oh, I'm going to be homeless tomorrow, but around I couldn't pay my council tax this month, and I've really struggled to pay my electricity bills. And it's picking up those trigger words to then have those conversations, because we've got a brilliant welfare benefits team that can go out and support that, maximise benefits, look at where they're doing. So it's just making our frontline services aware of those trigger words beyond that I'm going to be homeless tomorrow. With regards to London Borough's placing in Medway and using the example of the local authority that you mentioned, I will say that there's 80 bed spaces in that building, and we've had 10 Section 208s for that building. It's on a 3-year lease, so at the moment that's still within the lease period. We are aware of the owners, we are aware of what's happening with that, and we are in open conversations with them following that London Borough placing there. But just to highlight that bed spaces, and 9 are used by Medway. So there's a number of bed spaces and Section 208s that we have not received. So we are working with that. We keep an eye out, but again, there's no legislation to stop London Borough's purchasing outside of their area. So it's just making sure that when developments are coming through, we're having discussions with the planning authority, we're having discussions with my enabling team, so that we know where these buildings are coming through and sort of supporting that process through that way.
Thank you. So could I just quickly come back to you? Thank you. I thank you for the on the first point. I think that's all noted. I think that's it's positive, and I think the team that you've set up in order to tackle those, particularly that issue, I think is, hopefully in 12 months' time we'll be able to see that bearing fruits, and that's really positive. Thank you. And the second point, I think I agree. I mean, I still find it remarkable, particularly. I mean, not talking about that specific local borough, which is obviously now under a best value notice, etc., with MHCLG. So there's all sorts of. Just read the LGA report on that borough. But anyway, in terms of more generally, I'm just interested more widely in Kent, actually, how you find the engagement with other, your I guess, Chief Housing Officer colleagues. Do you find the engagement around those that are placing within Medway sort of that discussion easy, or is it hostile? I guess it probably varies on the borough. I'd be interested in that. Thank you.
We do meet every sort of 2 to 3 months. There is a sort of Chief Housing Officers group, Housing Directors group, and the main crux of our conversations is temporary accommodation. The big thing is around, you do keep placing in my borough, and that's putting pressure on our access to these properties, but also has a potential risk of much far wider hitting consequences, including our children and adult social care services. And I think it's the constant conversations that we're having. So we're having those conversations, but the issue is at the moment, Medway's local housing allowance at the 2011, 90% of the 2011 rate is low for us, but other boroughs get a higher rate. So it's cheaper for outside boroughs to place in Medway, because the subsidy rate is better for them to place outside of their borough, because they get a higher subsidy rate than we do. So that's one of the challenges, is that we're struggling to compete, because we only get our local housing allowance rate capped at the 90%, which is why our average is around £25 to £28 a night, and in some cases is up to £45 a night on top of the subsidy. So,
thank you very much.
Okay, we've got 4 more. Liz Keith first, please.
Thank you. I was pleased to hear that the supported living is still sort of going ahead, but I've been on the forum, Medway Parent and Carers Forum, since its inception over 15 years ago, and one of the things that we've seen is that those youngsters who were in that stage were about 4 are now young people who are leaving home, going into supported accommodation. So I just wanted to know that, especially youngsters with SEND, that they're being, looked at in regards to accommodation and supported living. The second thing was about, in regards to the foyer in Luton. I know that we discussed at a previous council meeting some concerns about housing vulnerable people in an area which is not the most desirable, shall we say, and has had problems of its own. I live in Luton, so I know what issues there have been in the past. It has improved, but the concern from some of our parents is that this sort of accommodation is for vulnerable people is put in areas which are probably not as desirable as they should be. So would there be plans to include that sort of accommodation in areas that are better served in the community?
So I'll take the first question. I need to put my glasses on because I can't see. I think when we've got young people who have EHCP and education, health and care plan assessment, and obviously they are deemed as being SEND and have special educational needs, we do refer to our colleagues in adult for them to do a Capacity Act assessment to understand their needs, and that will inform the type of accommodation they will require. And at that point, I think we start in that very early in order to make sure that we have enough time to plan and find the right placement and accommodation for them once they turn 18. And I think this is where the Move On panel and the working together with our colleagues in housing works very well, because for some of them we might identify that they are unlikely to ever be able to live on their own, so they need to have that wraparound support, and this is where the shared care type of arrangement comes in. And sometimes some of that cost is going to be met by the adult services when they accept the duty to help and support. So we do have, I think, a very good understanding of our children's needs. With that assessment being completed, that supports our decision making in terms of what type of accommodation they require.
And just to follow on from that, we've been doing some work over the last few years with adult social care around providing. So we've got 3 flight projects. 2 are in Gillingham and 1 is in Rainham. And so they're specifically around sort of adults, and some of them will be former care leavers that have gone on to require support as they've gone into adulthood. So we collectively are working together, and 2 of those projects are brand new properties that have come through, and we've been able to create the space with the needs of the users, so that the young people or the young adults as they come out have that support as they do that, and that they learn to live within a shared space. So there's more of those projects, and I'd love to do more as well, because they work well for the council as a council provision. With regards to Luton and the foyer, the Sunrise foyer, this was a building that MHS Homes have owned. It was no longer fit for purpose because I think it was a former sheltered accommodation. So it became a derelict building, and there are a number of derelict buildings in Medway, and there's always a high risk, and continues to be a high risk, around antisocial behaviour and just what derelict buildings attract. And so with the support of the ministry and the support of the council, we've been able to create a really beneficial accommodation, for much needed accommodation for supported housing. Okay, you may say that Luton wasn't the most appropriate provision for that. However, a building became available. It was remaining derelict because it wasn't suitable as its former use. And we've now been able to transform that across the council, the ministry and MHS into a beautiful facility for young people that risk of homelessness or are homeless that otherwise we wouldn't have. So it's additional bed spaces. There's 2 fully accessible units, which are amazing. I was absolutely blown away as a housing provider that they have created these. And it's about the support that MHS and our care, provide that support. They won't want that service to fail, because that's failure on both them and on for our young people. So it's about that provision. We're constantly looking for opportunities to provide supported housing. We've got our supported housing improvement programme, which sits within my service, and that's looking at all the supported housing provision outside of what we own and commission, and about how that, the good quality and whether it's in disrepair and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff going on to ensure that supported accommodation is available, is in good state, is being managed appropriately, and it's across the whole of Medway. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, Liz.
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, I just had a few different questions. So firstly, just going back to, I think Mark did ask this about the numbers of lets. So just to clarify again, is that the total number of lets, or is that just the total number of lets in social housing? Because if it would perhaps be helpful to see, because obviously the demand is so much higher than the lets, but what the sort of annual turnover is, in as much as how many people are coming on to the register compared to the number of lets, because obviously is that increasing year on year? Secondly, just with regards to sort of, you talked about preventing homelessness, so I guess that's sort of a lot of discretionary housing payments and things going on to try and sort of prevent that. And I just wondered where sort of Adrian talked about the sort of difficulties for private landlords these days, and obviously you know I'm a private landlord, and I'm aware of lots of landlords going out of the market, where they're sort of still able to serve Section 21s in this point of time. Do we ever, and I don't know whether there's a budget, because I know the budget is for temporary accommodation, but do we ever sort of, if someone approaches us for being made homeless and it's a Section 21 and they say, oh, my landlord's selling, do we ever consider buying that property? And would there be a budget? Because I'm just thinking that could, if that household becomes homeless, there's obviously there's going to be a cost there. If that property gets bought by someone who then is going to let it to out of area that we've discussed, all that sort of is rolling up huge costs. I'm just thinking, could there be a saving there for the council directly buying properties from private landlords? Thirdly, just wanted to ask with regards to school admissions. So I'm just thinking with families that are in this temporary accommodation, how that works, how you work with sort of the children's team with how we play. Say we've got a child, a family that's in Strood in temporary accommodation and they're coming up to either start primary or secondary, where do they get placed? Is it their temporary accommodation that we're using? And then what happens if they then get 6 months later get moved to Raynham? How we sort of cope with that. And just very briefly, on the numbers of intentionally homeless, the number quoted, 23, that's families with dependent children, isn't that figure, is it, that 23? Yeah, so obviously that's incredibly complex, I would imagine. And is there a time when, because I noticed that they've been in placements for up to 5 years, is there a time where that is then spent, or whatever the correct word is? I know with like CCJs it's 6 years. Is that after 6 years they're no longer intentionally homeless and they sort of get housed that way? Thank you.
I can answer everything except the school placement, so I'll probably come this way for that. But if I answer to James everything else. So on average, we have about 46 additional households currently going onto our housing waiting list. So that's 46 going on a month to the 700 odd we let a year. So yeah, at the moment we're getting 46. That's not the number of applications we're getting. The number of applications are around 300. So the team are having to go through those applications to make a decision on whether or not someone is eligible. So yeah, it's on average 46 households. So that's from anyone that needs sheltered accommodation up to 4, 5, 6 bedroom properties. So that's roughly where we are with that placement. The number of lets, as we said, it's around 700. What I can do is I can provide the number of households. So at the moment, on average, we're preventing into the private rented sector anywhere between 35 and 45 households a month. So we're able to prevent them and get them into private sector housing. And the Move On team, the last 2 months on average, are looking at an additional 13 households into the private rented sector. Moving out, which is why we've created that Move On team. The intentionally homeless families, there is no statutory time limit for the intentionally homeless, but we are working closely with Children's Services and our corporate housing finance panel about how we support those families to move on. So we are looking at reassessing all those families, looking at where's best placed to them, doing risk assessments on them and how long they've been in those properties. They generally are very complex, because if you're found intentionally homeless, it has quite a lot of ramifications around what you can and can't access. But yeah, so we are working to significantly reduce that number. Yeah, and I can't answer the one about the schools. So James. Oh.
Paul.
Yes, so on the school places, it's a parental preference. If they're already in a school place, they can stay there. Or if they want, so they move from Stroud to Rainham, they could apply for another school in Rainham. That's down to the parents' choice. Obviously, there are some areas where places are short, and we will support families to find schools where there are places, but it's really down to the parents, as it would be in any other in-year casual admission. Nothing changes really in that respect.
Thank you. And we've got Stavana.
Yep, it's working. Thank you, Chair. I think it's an amazing amount of work that actually has gone into something that actually can produce those numbers. So I think it's nice to see that actually we are on the right track. My question will be around support for those households. So in March this year, HealthWatch, in partnership with HealthWatch Kent, we published a report based on people's experiences of housing, rehousing issues, you name it, housing at risk of housing, homelessness. And one of the main themes that actually we've seen that came out of that feedback was mental health and how housing issues or being at risk of homeless or being homeless affects people's mental health and the support that actually they get. When they get the support, amazing, but how many people get that support? So my question is, how does that support look like from housing point of view? But equally, how well is housing supported by the system to support those households? Thank you.
So there's a number of ways that we provide support as a housing. So as a housing authority, we have an obligation to provide housing support. That does naturally extend beyond that just because of working in the kind of environment that we work in. So we have the equivalent of 2 full-time employees that are working Gemma's welfare benefit team that work solely on temporary accommodation placements. So they will provide assistance with ensuring they've got the right benefits, signposting them, ensuring that there's welfare checks around what they can access. We also have a visiting team. So we have, because the numbers in temporary accommodation have increased, we've brought in priority measures and we look at sort of high, low and medium risk households in temporary accommodation. So depending on whether or not you're a high, low or medium or low risk will depend on the frequency of visits. And also one of the big things that we are doing now is that we are going to open our front door. And that will make a significant difference because at the moment the main access into homelessness and housing advice is either online or via a telephone, which is not always the easiest way for our customers to access it. So that's something that we've been really passionate about opening, and we're looking forward to being able to open our front door from June later this month. So I think it's just about ensuring that we've got a very holistic view around it, and that if there are things that noted that the right referrals go in, that we encourage access to the children's hubs and the libraries and various areas that they can get additional support, because we are that housing provider and support, but also we're acutely aware that just because you're homeless, you may or may not require additional support. So that those things are there, and we will encourage people to take up those referrals and make access to those parts. And that does include visits to our out of area placements. So I just want to reassure we do visit our out of area placements. That has included, we no longer have a placement in further up north, but we had a household placed up north, and we did visits to that household as well as phone visits and Teams calls. We actually went and physically visited them to check that they were okay.
Bex, before I go on to Sharon, I was there this afternoon at the open door a couple of hours with 2 wheelchair users and myself. Not that accessible, really. So I have mentioned it to the team because I just think there are so many barriers that could be really quickly fixed. And if you want some support in that, it's widening doorways and maybe some better seating. I couldn't sit down, that sort of thing. Thank you.
So with regards to that, so this is not going to be our forever home. So our front door that we're opening will be at Kingsley House, but it's not our forever home. There's a lot of work going on in the background to where that front door provision will be going forward into the future. This is very short term. The service is currently limited, so we've always allowed limited access into Kingsley House. This is a full access. At the moment, all the risk assessments and all of that stuff for that full service opening is ongoing. So it's not going to be open till everything is, which is why I'm very loose about the date. I have a date, but there are criteria that the team have to meet before I will formally sign off and open that front door. So that would have been really useful information to the team today to inform the risk assessments that we're currently doing around accessibility. But yes, that is not our forever home because we're acutely aware it's not the best location or accessibility for everyone within the public. So yeah, it's just that we need to get that door open sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Sharon. You're next.
I was waiting for Dan to speak. In fairness, most of what I wanted to say has already been said, but which is good because my throat's about to go in a minute. But Bex, I want to commend you. Like when you look at them numbers of temporary accommodation for care leavers, they've really, really come down, and I feel like there shouldn't be a reason why a care leaver has to go into temporary, but I know there is issues, but I have faith in you that it's going to come down even further. So that said, also I was following on from what Liz said, but I was going to talk about the education. What about children that are placed out of area? How does that wrap around? And also, do we take into consideration that if children have got hospital appointments with a regular consultant, they're not moved out of area? And also, I can understand things like domestic violence. Sometimes it would be a good idea to temporarily move out of area, but do Medway still support if obviously a domestic violence, we've got CAMS involved and everything, would they still travel back to Medway for care for the children?
I'll answer the housing bit and then pass over to my colleagues. So with regards to the housing element, when we do a placement, we look into the circumstances in which, has the household got young people? Are there any other issues that we need to take into consideration, which is where the suitability check comes in. So with interim accommodation, which is where we haven't exhausted our investigations yet, there is a lower threshold for suitability. With a main duty, there is a very clear suitability level which can be challenged. Anyone is allowed to, a household is allowed to challenge on the grounds of suitability. That does include affordability as well as suitability of the property and area they place in. So my big aim with the service is to go back down to our pre-COVID levels of out-of-area placements, because then that allows us to try and support as many households in Medway with their security, with their support in every schools, medical appointments, etc., etc. Domestic abuse cases are always very complex. Most can't stay in Medway, and therefore we will support them to transition into a new safe location across that. So that's from a housing perspective. And I'll hand over to my colleagues with regards to.
If we already involved with the family, so they're subject to a child in need of child protection, then obviously we will make the referral, as I previously mentioned. During that transition period, we can look at how we can support them with travel costs. But I think what we try to do is to not create that level of dependency, and is just looking at who else is around that family to help and support them with travel. Because I think at one point we will step away and they need to be able to manage by themselves. If they haven't got anyone, then obviously we will look at our Section 17 budget and see how we can support. But once they're out of Medway and there's like Kent responsibility, I would expect that social services to kind of step in and help and support. With our looked after children, obviously, is different. We have a duty towards them. No matter where we place them, we will have to make sure that we support them to access services and appointments. So I think the criteria are a bit different in terms of responsibilities.
I just wanted to come. I was just thinking of a family that was placed maybe outside Kent and had regular checkups with Medway Hospital for whatever condition, and then moved out, whether it's for a domestic violence or for another thing. How do and they're going to move back to Medway? You don't want them to relinquish consultant here, get a consultant there, and then come back.
I think I'm not an expert in terms of health, but sometimes I think you get services where your GP is, and we have the same issue with our looked after children. They can't access CAMS if they place, let's say, in up north, because the GP is here. So it is where the child is. I think this is where the services need to be. But if it's a short-term move, then we can look at ways of supporting, because obviously we don't want for that disruption in terms of access to services, if possible.
I'll just come in there too. We must remember that children in temporary accommodation in and of itself is not a safeguarding issue. Those children, the parents still have parental responsibility for those children. We do not. So we have to tread carefully, and sometimes when families go into temporary accommodation, it is fractious. It does fracture existing life, and those sorts of things do happen, but those children are their parents' responsibility, not necessarily ours. They remain with their parents who have parental responsibility. But Nicolette is right, we do try and help as much as we can, but it's limited.
We have a low number of households that are involved with child in need or child protection that are currently in temporary accommodation. So it's just to understand that actually most families in temporary accommodation are self-sufficient, are okay, they can run their households. It's just the fact of the nature is that due to unforeseen circumstances, they've lost their previous settled home through no fault of their own, and so they're in temporary accommodation. We've got working households, we've got young households, old households, all possible combination. It's very mixed, and actually the levels of vulnerability is lower because generally with a household with a dependent child, the dependent child's the reason why they've got priority need because it's a dependent child. So, you know, and so if you're accepted as main duty, you have a priority need and you've not been found to have worsened your circumstances. So, yeah.
I mean, I think I was thinking in my head more special needs and children at risk, but I mean that wouldn't go through the suitability, so that you answered the question.
Okay, Dan and Leah, and then this bit's going to be closed.
Thank you, Chair. It's only a quick one, Bex. You know that you know you're doing such a great job, and I always tell Councillor Prenter that as well. You are doing a good job. I just want to follow on though from the Chair's comment, the Chairperson's comment around your Kingsley House approach. I know with another hat that I know Kingsley very well, and it isn't accessible. But you've also got the other aspect, which is a really good service operating there from a health point of view. We have the Forward Trust working there, but there's vulnerability outside that premises because we have users, we have people that are hanging around outside there. Not saying they're causing major issues, but it's because the building is not accessible and because people are waiting outside, including young people waiting for advice from your officers. You've got people they may have known from leaving care or whatever that are hanging around in larger numbers waiting to go into that premises at the same time. I just want you to look at that and remember that. But there is health and safety aspects with that building that need to be looked into. And I know you are doing a thorough, because I know Councillor Prenter was down there inspecting it herself, but please bear that in mind. And if you want to catch up at all, that'd be great. But bear them aspects in mind as well, please, for some of our vulnerable residents that are going in there.
So at the moment, the door into where the frontline services will be is shut, it's locked, and there's security there. The same is my services are primarily on the first floor. You can't access that without a key fob. So when we open that door, the way we've designed it, so at the moment you had to be let in and let in again and let in again. We will initially start it with still requiring that. Why have you come today? You know, checking why it is. But eventually that door will be open, so we won't have the hanging around element. We also, it's not significantly high, the hanging around element, because generally if there's a concern and it's a housing concern, staff and the security will look at that. So we know that this building isn't ideal, but there is a requirement for local authorities to have a open front door, not just a telephone front door, but to have an open front door. We need to get that open. So we are using Kingsley as a pit stop. It is definitely not my forever home for my frontline services. So what we're doing is we're going to make it as accessible as possible within the confines of that building as we work in the background on where our forever home hopefully will be. And that's sooner rather than later.
Sorry, Chair. I just want to say I agree with you 100%. I mean, you know, I work in there, so I've been in there for 11 years, so I know what it's like. But your door, it should be open. It was 5 years ago, it was open every day. But the main door of the building isn't always open. And that's coded and that's not secured by you. So, you know, we've stopped drug testing with young people going on in the toilets downstairs, everything. It's just something to be aware of. I know you are, but for a health and safety aspect, like the Chair said, just keep an eye on that because there is some real issues there.
Thanks, Dan. Leah.
So this is me going on about out-of-area placements, but you're off the hook this time, Bex. Just wondered around, it was something Liz said about education. I wondered how much we're seeing those out-of-area placements that we are taking, how much pressure does that then put on school places and how we're planning for that? Because I know most families that are placed here actually for a long time try and keep their kids in their original schools because I think they still think they're going to be moved back within 6 months when that's not the case, and then it's a crisis point when they decide to move them. So.
Yeah, a little while ago it was a big problem. We had a surge of inward migration and it did cause a problem with school places, and we had to create bold classes in a number of schools across Medway, both in primary and secondary, particularly around years 3, 4, 5 and 6 were the main areas. But that has settled down now, and we're not seeing so much additional pressure or extra pressure as we were in that period of time. And that was mainly due not just to, it was due to inward migration generally. So it's difficult for us when people move in, we don't ask them why they need a school place and why they're here. So some people have moved in for that reason, others to work here from the the health service recruitment drive a few years ago. So that was the big pressure, but it has settled down and we're able to cope at the moment with our in-year applications.
So if I can quickly, do we have that data at all, Bex, of how many out-of-area, this one I think would then be you, how many out-of-area placements actually apply for Medway schools?
I won't hold the data on how many of them will have asked for placements because the Section 208 requirement is to notify the borough that you're placing in. They don't have to notify us when they leave. They don't have to.
Yeah, okay,
so it's just about that initial notification. We have some detail. So I have kind of like the household number. So we get very limited information. So kind of like name, address of the temporary accommodation, and household size. So that household size could say 4, but it could be, 2 parents and 2 dependent, non-dependent young people, or it could be 1 plus 3 children, or it could be 2 plus 2 children. We don't get that information. We just get that household number. So that's the information we're provided under a Section 208.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And thanks, Beck. You're doing a fantastic job. I'm so excited that you're going to be licensing landlords because I cannot tell you, Luton needs it, and I know that's going to make an immense difference, and I'm excited to see how much Medway are going to get from Rachel Reeves' 39 billion today. So the only way is up. Thanks. Vice Chair.
So I move that the committee notes the report. I don't think we had any recommendations. So is that seconded?
Seconded by Mark, thank you. And is that agreed? Right. Thank you. And now it's questions for Nicorette. Any takers? Okay, could I start then? Can I say thank you? It's so lovely to have you back in, Medway, but just the fact that you're so hands-on and you respond so quickly to, and I know I'm a bit of a bear with a sore head when I need a response, but you are just immense on that. And I know that you're going to continue to make a difference, so I appreciate that. And Councillor Joy, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. Just a small one. So on 3.5.1, and when you were talking, you're saying that where possible, we'd like stay in put with their foster parents, if that's an option. Well, we currently only have got 12.9% doing this. It's just over 1 in 8. I just wonder what support is given to the foster parents to support them with this, because it's a burden financially on them, and if all finance stops, which it didn't really cover in the report, I'm just thinking if we still supporting them, and if not, is it an option to try and encourage that to go up quite a bit more from the 1 in 8? Thank you.
Thank you. So obviously we would not expect our carers to do it for free. So obviously there is financial support that is being offered. I do not have the figure. I will have to go back and check with my colleague from the fostering service. But I think that there is not similar to the fostering rates. It is a bit lower. And there is an expectation for our young people to contribute a bit towards the rent, towards other expenses in the home, and that's part of our supporting them to develop those independent living skills. So there is support being provided, financial support, and obviously they continue to be supported by our fostering colleagues as well. So if there are any issues that they encounter, we are always there to step in and support.
Brilliant. So I've got Adrian, Sharon, then Leah.
Thank you, Joe. It was good to see in the report that we've got 4 one-bedroom flats being made available at Britton Farm. Britton Farm, to remind colleagues, is the rented affordable for the Chatham waterfront development by the Medway Development Company. What I am concerned about is that they, as part of the social rented provision for Mountbatten House, which is going to be put up at the upper mount, the original intention was that some of that would be allocated for care leaver accommodation. My understanding that has now been dropped, which I find very, very disappointing, because like Britton Farm, it is a very good spot for our care leavers to be, because it's literally only a 10-minute walk to Mid-Kent College or the railway station. Very good bus connections as well. And the Upper Mount is, again, a highly accessible area for young people. So I would like some reassurance that we could get that accommodation back for care leavers, please.
I could come back on that one. So with regards to Upper Mount, which is currently being developed out by Medway Development Company, and we're likely to purchase that as part of our council portfolio. This is mixed bedroom spaces. So this is a number of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom units of accommodation. So we wouldn't look to allocate necessarily larger properties to care leavers. So the site can't sustain all care leavers, you wouldn't want to do that as part of a provision. This is independent living. You don't get a large number of young people in one particular space. It needs to be across the whole of our accommodation provision. So the local lettings plan hasn't been drafted for Upper Mount yet because there's still negotiations going on in the background between my team and MDC. But as part of the local lettings plan, we are likely to put additional provision in, like we've done at Britton Farm, is that we are likely to look at a number of that accommodation to be for care leavers and in that space. So there will be care leaver provision in that space. At the moment, until I've finished looking at the local lettings plan and the area and what we could look in that area, I can't confirm the number of properties that we will do, but we always allocate a number for care leavers, and also some of that might be vacant properties. So if we've moved someone from a 1-bed somewhere else into a 2-bed or the 3-bed in some cases, the vacancy that we create from that will then be allocated to a care leaver. So either way, there will be an allocation for care leavers as part of Upper Mount under our local lettings plan. So the likelihood is it will be some at Upper Mount and some following transfers from other accommodation.
Yes, we'll come back on that, because I think it is important. Whilst it's nice to hear there was accommodation out at Hoe, with perfect fact, in some respects, that's quite inaccessible. The bus service is not brilliant. So, I think to put young people out there is not right. Yes, the accommodation might be superb, but is it a good place? Oh, it's a safe place to be. But given the bus service, young people, probably can't afford to run their own transport. They'll be reliant on public transport. Having that accommodation within our town centres is a much better place to be in, and that's why I'm quite pleased to see the Sunrise foyer used for that. And yes, there was quite a lot of opposition to that at one stage, but certainly when we had the Medway task force going, they put a huge amount of effort into trying to get that improve the area. And I understand the police are still, and our staff as well, are still working on that. So I think that's a good combination again, because it's walking distance to all sorts of facilities, and it's easy to get to college or to work from those. I think putting them out where the area I represent, Lawswood and Walderslade, I don't think that's such a, although it's a very pleasant place to live, you just have not got that connectivity that I think young people need.
No, and that's why when we look at the local, so the properties in who were part of a Section 106 allocation within the development that West Kent were partnering on. Upper Mount and other local lettings plans is that actually that's what the local lettings plan is we look at the area, we look at who lives in that area, we look at what provision are in that area, and that's what we aim to reflect that in the local lettings plan, which is why with some local lettings plans you'll find it's not the person at the top of the list that will necessarily get the allocation, because you're trying to ensure that you're replicating the existing area. So you don't want all new house, all new people straight, their first tenancy in an area, when actually you've got mixed tenure around it. So that's why the local lettings plans are so important, and I'm more than happy to speak to any care leavers groups or young people that would like to look at how we do those local lettings plans, to have a look at how we can ensure that their voice is heard as much as our tenants' voice is heard when we look at our local lettings plans.
Thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you. Sharon?
Thanks, Joe. I think I was a bit premature in asking this question. I want to talk about the inspectors, but you just finished on something that I wanted to blend with it. So I was privileged to be there at the hub when the inspectors had their first meeting, and I know that they weren't there for the inspectors meeting. They just happened to be at the hub and got excited about the project, and then they joined. So I think one of my things is are we already starting to do recruitment for that? Because I think the buzz is there now and we should start looking. 2, have we got other projects, like Bex just said, that we could get the young people involved with, because I think that would be really good. And two, I also know, or three, I also know that there was problems getting the young people, the young inspectors, their DBS sorted out, and I know that that was waning a bit on their enthusiasm. So I know that's out of our control, but I'm so glad to see that it got sorted and they are out inspecting. So again, thanks, it's a brilliant project. Just want to see more of it, and if we've got any updates on any other projects or recruitment, thanks.
Yeah, so thanks for that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always sort of some delays that are out of our hands for that, but you're absolutely right. They're really enthusiastic. It's a pilot project. We're confident that within 6 months we can demonstrate that actually it's benefited everybody. And personally, I'd like to make it a rolling program that actually we're constantly kind of recruiting people to come on it. It is something that probably has a time limit for each individuals to do. You know, you learn, you get skilled up, you do some inspections, and then you help skill the next group up and come through and do all those sorts of things. And I know we've also looked at potentially, you know, whether we can get any kind of qualifications attached to it as well as part of that learning. So they're discussions we'll have with Mid-Kent College and others around whether, you know, we can do something along those lines. I think it's a really good point, and obviously Beck's just raised that about kind of, you know, those sorts of things. And I think Nicoletta and I's ears sort of pricked up and thought, actually, that is absolutely something we should get our young people involved in, whether that's, you know, Children in Care Council, whether that's our Young Lives Foundation, you know, young inspectors, because I think it is really important, and that's the sort of step after the one we're looking at the moment, isn't it, around what care leavers expect. And you know, I myself was involved in some of those initial discussions with Mark around Upper Mount Car Park, and it was a joint decision between Children's Services and Housing around the fact that, given the location, we felt that it was appropriate for young people, but not potentially for that totality of numbers to be all on one site. So I think you know, it's an example of a good collaboration where we are actually being flexible with our housing colleagues who are out saying we really would like some young people in there, but we probably don't want 12 or however many of that is. We need to get a balance, because I think what young people told us beforehand is, you know, they wanted to kind of ingratiate themselves into kind of normal life rather than just be put in particular buildings. And we try and do that even with some of our young accompanied asylum seekers as well, that, you know, we try not to kind of have big groups of them all in lumps, because actually they, you know, they're part of our society. It's not healthy for people to do that. But yeah, absolutely take on board your point, Sharon, and yeah, we'll certainly be speaking to Bex about it, and any suggestions people have about how those schemes can expand and build and continue, we're very, very open to.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Integration and equality in a multicultural society is beneficial to everybody. Leah. Oh, you've done it.
So the first bit I think was for Nicoletta, and it was around someone who's aged 16 to 18. I know it says in there that there's a variable level of support, but it also says that people can opt out of that. So I wondered, number one, what is the minimum level of support? And then if a young person was to opt out of that because they are living with friends and family, and then that relationship breaks down, are they able to opt back in?
I will get used to it by the end of the meeting. They can opt out from 21 plus. So obviously we have a duty to help and support and be there for them until they're 21. And that is based on a needs assessment. And there's the pathway plan that we start at 15 and a half. So obviously we have quite a number of years of working with a young person and understanding the trajectory and the level of support they need. And you are right, if things don't go as they planned, they can always opt in. So we do have, I think, our personal advisors, the conversation that I had with them, even if the young person decides, actually, I don't need your support post 21, sometimes they call back in and they ask for help and support, and then we will be there for them. So yeah, the option is there, and they know that. At the point when we end our involvement at 21, we send them a very detailed letter detailing exactly what the options are, what additional support is there, and where to find us if they need to come back.
Thanks. Jim?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a general question really, Nicoletta. Obviously with care leavers, it's great within the report to hear what Medway is doing. But I'm just interested to know how Medway compares with neighbouring boroughs and other parts of the country in terms of the speed that they can move on to other independent living, the difficulties that Medway have compared to other boroughs, things like that. I just wondered if you've got any stats about that. Thank you.
I think I've included a graph in my report, I think just to evidence how well we're doing compared to the other local authorities and neighbouring boroughs in terms of securing suitable accommodation for our young people. So I think that is a success that we always, I think, we voice it quite often. When Ofsted came, I think they were very positive about the work that we're doing, the PA are doing with our young people. And I think in terms of the speed is always different because we're working with young people and they have different needs. So I think we don't want to just do it, yes, it's the same rule for everyone. We work with the young person individually, and some of them might get there sooner, some of them might get there a bit later. Even with the housing officer that we have in place in terms of training for tenancy, again, I think I've included in my report, some young people are ready for that to move into their own accommodation sooner, others a bit later in terms of their needs. So it's always, I think, very difficult to kind of measure us against because our children are unique, they have different needs, and we do the best we can to support them through the journey and transitioning into adulthood.
Yeah, thank you. Just to come back, Joe, if that's all right. I used to be a trustee of a homeless charity for single people in Medway, and one of the things that we always struggled with was move-on accommodation. And I know coming from fostering is slightly different, but being single people, you mentioned within the report that you obviously individually assess them to find suitable accommodation, but generally, how difficult is it to find suitable accommodation, or are you having to sort of make compromises at times?
I think Beck's already made reference to the work that we're doing together, the move-on panels that we have on a monthly basis. Those panels are attended by the service manager, the team manager, the personal advisor, colleagues from housing, commissioning and finance. So I think we are having this conversation about young people and their needs at that moment in time, and we're thinking what else would they need to support them to get into the right type of accommodation. And I think if an accommodation becomes available but is not to the standard and not to what our young people need, I think we will have conversation with Bex and with her team, because I think the same I would do for my own child. I would not want our children, our care leavers to just live in an environment that is not appropriate or suitable for them. So we don't do compromises on that. I think confidently I would say that, and I think collectively we are trying to find the right solution for them.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for your Ofsted report, because I think it's quite glowing. They were looking at the areas that needed to improve, and we're certainly on that upward trajectory, which is really, really useful, and absolutely a credit to you all. So there are no more questions. So, Vice Chair.
I move that we note the information in relation to accommodation for care leavers.
Is that seconded? Seconded by Marion. And is that agreed? Thank you. Can we have a 2-minute comfort break, please? Because I've been asked for one. Thank you. If we could look at 5C now. So, oh, sorry, Jane. Started James's bit without James. Apologies. Oh dear. Okay, any questions for 5C? I've got Mark, Marion and Adrian. Anybody else? No?
Thank you, Chair. Just looking on the section with regards to advice and analysis and some of your little graphs you've got on there. The first one, number of QA case dealt with annually, currently trending, if it keeps on at current rates, is 1,216 for the year, which is an 83% increase on last year. But looking at the other two graphs, multi-agency meeting visits and number of Ofsted alert notifications, they're actually only trending between 4 and 10% increase for the year. Is there any reason why the actual case being dealt with potentially trending at 83% increase on last year, please?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, a lot of it's due to the fact that the market has expanded so quickly around, I think, when there was the real sufficiency crisis of maybe 3 years ago. Everybody felt that they wanted to get into the business, as it were. So you saw an increase in supported accommodation providers. You saw an increase in unregistered providers, children's homes, all of those sorts of things. And alongside that, when you have a market that goes from being quite shallow to being sort of quite rich, the Often the knowledge doesn't come with that, so there's a lot of new providers on the market that don't have experience. Therefore, that generates more issues, inquiries, problems, those sorts of things. But also the workforce hasn't caught up either. So a lot of the workforce is inexperienced or going through qualifications and all of those sorts of things. So I think that's what we're seeing at the moment. We're seeing that kind of sweet spot around actually the market. Suddenly people have gone, oh, actually, there's not enough spaces. Let's set up a children's home, supported accommodation, that's supported lodgings, all of those sorts of things. But the quality standards haven't necessarily caught up yet, and there's still a lot of learning in the system. It's not to say that some of these providers can't be good, but they've tried to get in quickly. So that would be my rationale for what, I mean, it is a huge increase, don't get me wrong, but that would be my rationale why, is that actually people have gone a bit too quick, and actually as a result we've had some quality standards issues, some staff that maybe haven't had all the training they need to have, and all of those sorts of things. And we have seen our embargo list increase as well quite rapidly with providers. We're going, either you're not ready or this isn't going to work.
Just like to say, with that increased workload and you actually meeting that demand, it sends out a really good message for young people and vulnerable people across the whole of Medway. So thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Marion.
Thank you, and thank you for your report. Just wanted to ask about, in the report it says that there are 50 embargoed providers that they embargoed. There was a specific case that I remember that a provider registered a limited company, is provided like assisted accommodation, or when they find out that they are not providing accommodation up to standard and they're embargoed, can they just go and open another limited company and apply again? Is there a way to prevent that by maybe blacklisting the owners, not just the companies?
Thanks. It's a really, really good point, because it is a market where you see Phoenix organisations rise from organisations that have folded or come in. We've all got quite good at Companies House website and sort of doing our junior detective role around tracking which directors appear with new companies and all of those sorts of things. And actually it's fascinating to see how many of them pop up with the same names, or, you know, something folded in March and reopened in April with that name. So we try and do all we can. I'm not saying we capture everybody, because it is that there is no safety net for those sorts of things. And obviously if they set up a new company, they can basically wipe the slate clean, you know, realistically. So in some cases we are almost inspecting the same organisation, or quality assuring the same organisation we saw 6 months ago under a different name in a different premises. So that's the reality of it. I think we do work really closely with planning at the moment. I think there's more we can certainly do with planning. And at a recent regional care cooperative meeting I was at, there's one South East local authority that seems to think they found something in planning regs, which can say, actually, with regards to those sorts of providers, we will reject anything that comes through unless adult social care or children's social care say that they need it and they're going to work with it. Now, I've not had a chance to fully explore what that is, because we were only alerted of that last week. That would help. That actually we're saying, you know, the default position is no, but actually if you come to us and say you're going to work with us and we do some quality assurance work with you, then you can. As I say, I'm not promising we can do that, but it's an interesting concept, and actually it's certainly worth us exploring with Dave Harris and his team. So yeah, a lot of that is, like you say, around sort of Phoenix from the Flames providers, things that are popping up that people we already know. So yeah, really good point.
Okay, thank you. Next on my list is Adrian.
Thank you, Joe. Not so much a question, more of a comment. Before I start on the actual thing, I was pleased, James, you're using the Company House's website. I must say, when a little while back, when I chaired the Council's Procurement Board, the Company's House website was just as useful as the agenda for the Procurement Board. Yeah. there's one or two things that didn't happen because of that. So well done with that. I'd just like to say, though, reading the report on the quality assurance and the work done by the young inspectors, how impressive all that is. And I think it's great that Medway's getting not only national recognition, but recognition overseas. Well, Jersey's the other side of the Western approach, so it is overseas. No, I think that needs to be highlighted because it's good to see, where good work that's been done here in Medway is recognised outside of Medway. So I'm really pleased to see that. Thank you.
Douglas? Leah next after Douglas.
Thank you. And James, the question I asked initially regarding the 662 different inquiries and issues, how are you going to break down what's the inquiry and what is the issue or challenge?
I can absolutely get that to you. As you can imagine, for a team that are very detailed led, they've got that breakdown. I haven't got it to hand, but I can get it across to anybody that's interested. Just an example of some of the things that it could be in those divisions. So that number includes things like member inquiries, like, around what's happening here, or, those sorts of things. It could be a complaint from either a young person or a member of staff, or those sorts of things. Whistleblowers, we get quite a lot of whistleblowers from staff or carers or, people in the neighbourhood around saying something's not right, you need to go and have a look. Could be linked to some of the LADO elements, increasing amount linked to, I think, what all colleagues are saying around with our fraud team as well. Around actually looking into some of those elements that obviously we can help support around, how contracts are procured and what we've seen and finances and all of those sorts of things. Other local authorities who've got children placed in Medway will often come to us with intelligence or wanting a bit of advice. And then obviously general public inquiry. So it's a sort of amalgam of all those things, but I could definitely get a breakdown sent across as to how that all kind of pans together, if that's okay.
Sure, thank you. And also, one more. One of the blights I find is when, you want to have a survey done on your property and you can have a desktop survey done. Somebody can just do a cursory inspection online and then certify your house is valued at a certain amount. This is in relation to 100 quality assurance visits per annum that you got listed here, but it said not including virtual. So could you let us know what the virtual element would embody, and how would that equate to quality, like assessment or review?
So we virtually never place a child with a provider where we've not done a quality assurance visit. Sometimes if the placement is urgent and it's somewhere else in the country and we can't get one of our staff to get from here to Lincoln, for example, within the 48 hours, what we'll do is we'll still ask for all of their documentation, so everything from insurance documents, training matrix, DBSs, all of those sorts of things, but we will actually ask them to do a virtual tour of the house. So actually through the front door, what does the kitchen look like? Show us around which bedroom the young person is going to be in. What does the garden look like? So actually we've got some record of, knowing what it looks like. We will usually then schedule a visit, within a few weeks' time to be able to get up there, but logistics of having such a small team. So that's the difference between sometimes virtual ones, we have to do just because of the speed, but we're still collecting all of their compliance data alongside that to make sure that we've got everything in line. And I know we are far more comprehensive than most local authorities in our approach to that. And I think linked to that, and I should have made the point earlier, I just wanted to, because I know there's been lots of different discussions. With regards to us placing sort of children in accommodation, we don't place under 18s in bed and breakfast, we don't place them in hotels. It's been at least 3 years since anything even similar to that has happened. So when we're talking about the over 18s, it's a little bit different, but for our under 18s, we've never done that. And even when we're talking about our unregulated cohort that I know, is often a bit of a hot topic, they are all pre-existing organisations. They might not be yet registered by Ofsted, but they have a structure, they have governance, they have management, they have policies. So a lot of other local authorities will place in B&Bs or pop-up children's homes and those sorts of things. We don't do that. you know, and sometimes it's hard to do that, as Nicoletta knows, and we have lots of 6 o'clock sort of meetings around that. But I just wanted to kind of make that difference, because we're very proud that we don't go down that route, because that is not what we want for our children and young people. I can't say it's never ever going to happen, but I can't see any time in the future that that would need to happen for us.
Okay, Leah.
So I'm glad you touched on unregulated provisions, because I think I've never fully understood what that means. So they're called unregulated provisions, but when you look through, there's actually, we are regulating them and there are things happening. So what is an unregulated provision, and why are there some children whose needs can't be met by regulated provisions? So what would cause a child to be placed in an unregulated provision?
Yeah, really good point. So unregulated, it's become a lot clearer since Ofsted have brought in the regulations around supported accommodation, because you had some grey areas beforehand. So, I mean, it is what it says on the label. It's unregulated by Ofsted or CQC. So you're absolutely right. We provide our own regulation in those instances, but it's not a nationally recognised regulation. So whilst we are confident that it meets the needs of our children and is safe and all of those sorts of things, Ofsted haven't. That can be down to a number of reasons. It could be that they are starting up and they're just kind of setting up. It could be that they're waiting for Ofsted to come in. And, you know, we know from our own experience, it often takes 6, 7, 8 months for Ofsted to come in from when the application goes in. So it could be due to a number of those factors. Sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Just what would, so it says in there that sometimes regulated can't meet, so.
Yeah, so often it's around young people who are in crisis or with sort of time-limited needs who can't be placed alongside other people for different reasons. It's usually quite detailed reasons, and it might not be that that's a forever thing. So it might be linked to an allegation against staff or another young person. It might be that a young person's coming out of hospital and actually we need to kind of do a really phased step down where another young person, you know, can't necessarily be placed alongside them. It might mean that we need to put a deprivation of liberty order in for a short amount of time. And I mean, I don't know how much people know about deprivation of liberty orders, but it can include things like locking doors, window restrictors, restraint, all of those sorts of things. It's very hard to do that. Well, it's impossible to do it in a foster home, but it's very hard to do it in a children's home where other children are there, because if you're not careful, you're depriving their liberty. So obviously, you know, locking front doors and locking kitchens and those sorts of things. So it's those reasons, really. It's a combination of really specialised needs for that young person, or that we think it's a good provider, but they've just not got to registration point. We're down to, I think, at the end of this week, 4 unregulated young people, and 3 of those are at a provision that's being inspected in 3 weeks' time by Ofsted. So if everybody can keep their fingers crossed on that one.
Brilliant, thank you. And I will never forget my trip to Eden House, where the former Mayor Marion over there said, this is the gold standard and this is what should be available for all of our children in care. So thank you for what you do. And obviously this report is really easy to read and the quality assurance is fabulous. So that's, you know, keep up the massive, amazing work. Vice Chair.
I move that the committee agrees the recommendations as set out in 1.1 to 1.4 in the report.
Is that seconded? Thank you, Mark. And agreed? Okay, thank you very much. The best part of the evening for me, only because I went there and it's just got better and better and better. This is my favourite one. So high expectations for next time. Over to our young people, Olivia and Rose.
So we did conference in February and it went really, really successfully, and we got a lot of information from young people. So we had 119 participants among 20 schools in Medway. And the theme was live, learning and working in Medway. So a lot of people said about work experience, apprenticeships and things like that, and if they're available in Medway and how to access them. It was funded by Child Friendly Medway, and overall I think we all had a very good time. It was my first time going, and I think it was a good way to connect with a lot of young people in one place.
I echo that as well. And the range of people, you know, I've always harped for inclusion, and it was like tick, 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 tick. And also the contributions, not just from our Children's Council, but from everybody that was invited. And obviously, I'm a bit biased, but you know, I've been going for a number of years, and it really did make me feel like Tigger as I was coming out, really, because the smiles of the people leaving and the connections that were being made were phenomenal as well. And today, obviously, the Chancellor's giving more money to skills and education, you know, a couple of billion to upskill, you know, for children and life skills, but also plumbing and, you know, linked to what she's given to housing and education. So that's right up what was being discussed. So you're ahead of the curve, really, aren't you? Any questions? Right, George, Jim, Marion and Leah, and then Adrian. Oh, sorry, Liz. You always get my blind eye, don't you?
So high vis the future. Thank you, Joe. And I think I probably have an even greater interest, so I should, I'll probably declare that, I used to be the chair of the Youth Council, and I used to sit there presenting this like this, which used to be quite nerve-wracking. So anyway, well done, and thank you both for all you've done and for preparing this year's report, because I know the work that goes into that, and yeah, I've sat there and done the same thing the other way round. So anyway, so my question was just around sort of how you want, let me just rephrase that. My question was really around sort of outcomes and obviously influencing in terms of the council as a sort of the main purpose of the conference in terms of collecting data from young people and being able to then use that to apply back into how the council delivers services. So I'm just interested particularly around what you found in the context. Obviously we've got the local plan discussions around the ways of travelling around Medway. I know that for a very long time, children and young people have raised lots of concerns, particularly in some of our rural parts on the Hoo Peninsula, around access to buses and public transport. So I'd just be interested in terms of, particularly around question 1, how you sort of found the workshops in terms of a day of the life of a young person accessing around Medway, in the context of obviously the plan that we've got coming forward, which will sort of plan where future housing is across all 5 towns and the peninsula. Thank you. It is now, but no.
So we found that a lot of young people did bring up bus services a lot with travel among Medway, specifically like the Arriva services and how that they think that they should be improved by having more frequent buses around Medway again, especially through the rural parts. And somebody who lives on the Hoo Peninsula myself, I can definitely back that up with kind of helping with not only the arrival and timings of buses, but also the communication between like the app. You can get the apps for it, but just like timings and accuracy with that to help with, you know, even not even day-to-day life, but schooling and things like that. Because a lot of young people will end up being, you know, not on time to certain things that could affect their education in the future, I think.
I mean, obviously, I don't know if you saw Rachel Reeves today. She is giving 15.6 million towards transport. I'd already alluded to the 1.2 billion for training and upskilling young people. And obviously, there's 69.5 billion going to education, which we all obviously would get our share of. Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you. I think I was next. Yeah, great to hear about the conference and all the things and the activities that you did. Makes me want to be 17 again in some ways, but it just sounded really good. I was just obviously thinking about some of the stats, and one of them which stood out, which I think you've highlighted, is obviously a much greater proportion of respondents from the grammar schools, even though all the schools were represented quite well across Medway. So there's that issue just I wanted your reflections on. But also I just wanted to know whether you found, of all the people that were responding, actually do they live in Medway? Because obviously some people come from outside Medway but go to the Medway schools, particularly the grammar schools. So I just wondered if you got any feedback on any of that.
So with the survey where we had 305 participants, I think, we did find that the majority of people who responded were from grammar schools, and I think that's because the way that we were able to send it out, a lot of the people who were sending it out were in grammar schools specifically, so we are trying to contact non-grammar schools and send schools more, and although they had the opportunity to complete the survey at the conference themselves, we couldn't police all of them doing it, so it's kind of up to them to do it and take on that task. With those who live in Medway, so as Youth Council, we cover those who go to school, live and work in Medway. I think there was a question on the survey, but I haven't included it, so I can find out for you how many actually lived in Medway, but I think the majority of them did, from what I remember.
Yeah, thank you. I just thought whether it's 5% not out of Medway or is it 15%? Just give me a sense. So if you could get the figure through, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Marion?
Thank you, and thank you for your report. Actually, that was my question as well, about over-representation from the grammar schools. But I want to point out about some of the data that came out from the conference. So 33% of young people feel unsafe in Chatham and Gillingham High Street, which the other number that stands out for me is 66% of participants in the survey haven't had any work experience yet. And the final one, 46% of students feel that there is insufficient mental health support for schools. These really good results coming out from our young people, and we need to take it seriously. I'm just wondering, how is the council gonna respond to this? Are we gonna take it? And I don't know who can answer that question, but is it gonna go to the portfolio holders of the relevant portfolio holders take action, or?
It's a good question, and it goes far and wide usually. When I read this, I was thinking this should go to the Medway Safeguarding Children Partnership, because 5.5, there's something there around safety, a request of the police. So what I usually do is look through it and see where it needs to go. In the past, it has been to Community Safeguarding Partnership, so it does go wide. My biggest concern is closing that loop so we can send it off with the different asks but it's up to people to pick up the ask and do something with it. So your question is quite relevant, really, because I've been sitting here thinking, how do I do that? Yeah, but I will do something with it.
Yeah, because I'm a father of 2 young children, and I really want to see this statistic improve, if possible.
Well, we do for the whole of the 63,000 children in Medway. Absolutely. Adrian, you're next.
Thank you, Joe. And it was a very interesting report. And like colleagues, I found some of the statistics a little bit disconcerting. Particularly the 33% of people who found safe. And Leanne, I think this should go back to the Community Safety Partnership, because we have, you're right, discussed it in the past. But one of the problems we have with policing here in Medway is, although we have some really excellent police officers and senior police officers in the community policing team, there is a revolving door on Medway Police Station, unfortunately. The inspectors and the chief inspectors don't seem to last any longer than 3 years. Some of them considerably less. I think we had one chief inspector who was only here in Medway for 9 months. And this is a real issue. And I think, I tried to, when I was chair of the Community Safety Project, bang on to the chief constable that it, we needed more stability. So I think it'd be a good thing to go back to that, because I think the people who are now the chief inspector and inspector for community policing need to understand how you feel. The other one was about the 46% do not believe there was sufficient mental health support. I don't know if Ailish could come up with anything. And the other one was the 49% of young people that believe there are not enough jobs available for people under the age of 18. I don't want to make excuses for people, but when I had a proper job to do, not as a counsellor, we had young apprentices, and the ones who were under 18, every single task you gave them had to be risk assessed. So I think that sometimes there's a with a big employer like I work for, it wasn't a problem because we had the manpower to support our young people. But I think a lot of smaller companies perhaps have not got the time, because it takes a long time, sort of time out of the normal working day, to train people, which is a good thing to do. We should all, all companies do. But I think, and as Medway has got so many small and medium-sized businesses, perhaps they find that a little bit difficult. I know it's frustrating, but there is a reason there. But as I say, but I think you've done a really good job here. I think Leanne's right. It's just how we find a way of making sure that that voice you've got gets heard by the right people. But well done.
Can I get Ailish to come in on the health?
Thank you very much. So we've been to this committee before around the increasing emotional wellbeing and mental health support provision that we do have across Medway now. It's been something that we've been consistently building over the last 3-4 years. We have got far more provision now than we did. We've got mental health support teams in about 50% of our schools. We've got emotional well-being teams in those schools who don't have the nationally prescribed mental health support teams. And we've also got we've obviously got our online counselling support services like Cooth that are available, and we now have QWell, which is for 18 plus as well. So for some of the care leavers and the older young people, there's a different online support service available there. We've commissioned some bespoke services for more vulnerable children, like children with children in care experienced children and care leavers. And last November or October, our new service called Brave went live, which is a low mood and anxiety pathway. And we actually still have capacity within our Brave service. We've got capacity within the short intervention therapy service. But what we recognise is that these are lots of different services, and how does a young person or a parent know, or a professional know, which one do I use when, and when do I refer into them? So I don't think necessarily the challenge is access. I think it's understanding the pathways and how to refer into them. And one of the things that the committee will be aware that we're doing is commissioning the Therapeutic Alliance now, which is pulling together all of those services at that lower level support, so below the specialist CAM services, but having a single front door into that. So it's not for the professionals, the parents or young people to work out which of these different services do I need, but actually I'm going to say I need help, and then it's for the service, the Therapeutic Alliance, to say this is the best pathway for you and we'll support you in this way, to remove some of that confusion. And it also means that when we're marketing and promoting and trying to encourage people to access these services, it's just one front door, it's one website, it's one email address, it's one phone number. It makes it all simpler for everybody. And that will be going out to tender very soon with a go-live date of April next year. But always very happy to come and speak to Medway Youth Council about the services that are available, how we can promote that further and how we can raise awareness. So please reach out to us anytime. We'd be delighted to come along and talk to you and help to increase the awareness of the services that are available.
Right. Are you happy to move on to the next questions, or do you want to come in? Yeah, move on. So we've got Leah, then Liz.
So much of my points about the concerning statistics have been addressed, but around the lack of access to work experience, I thought that was compulsory in year 10. So I know obviously it's now facilitated through academies and things. I don't know if we have the centralised data, but I wondered if it was possible for us to have a briefing note on how many of our children are offered that experience, how we compare nationally, and then also how we compare in selective and non-selective and SEND schools. So just generally the breakdown of what that data looks like and where are people not able to access work experience.
Could you come in back on that? Is that reasonable request? Thank you, Leah. That would be really useful. Okay, Liz.
Thanks, Jo. Thanks very much for this report. I thought it was absolutely really great to read what you've got up to, and I'm quite disappointed that I missed the event. I've been to your conferences before and they've always been really good, but I was just really sort of pleased to see sort of all the organisations that you had there and the input. I think that's, I don't remember that from when I've been before, so I think that's, you know, it's a really great improvement. I always love to see the sort of diverse number of schools. I know you sort of mentioned there was a lot of higher on the sort of grammar schools, but you know, I see you've got the special schools there. I always love to see when Abbey Court are there and included, and you know, I see that you've got independent schools as well, so it's great that you've gone across the broad range of schools in Medway. So well done for that. I just wondered sort of on sort of outcomes and things, how, if you've got a plan for sort of, you've got these lots of recommendations from the information that you've gathered, whether you've got a plan to sort of hold the local authority and other organisations to account for some of those recommendations. So I just, and maybe if you haven't, if I could be so bold as to sort of suggest that you maybe do sort of either quarterly or after 6 months kind of revisit this and sort of make contact and say, where have you got with these recommendations that we've put forward, and make sure you get some feedback on whether, you know, I'm sure not all those recommendations are going to be able to be implemented, but just to see, you know, that it's been listened to, that it's been looked at, and if something can't be addressed, as, you know, a reason why would be really good.
Thank you. So I think that is something we're looking to push this year, especially to make sure that we do look to see that this report goes further and stuff comes out of it. Because I think before sometimes we have kind of just done a report and that's been the end of it. But I think one of our big things that we're looking to do this upcoming term is to make sure that actually some of the stuff that comes out of this report is seen and we have evidence of that we can go back to people in the future to say that we have done stuff And this is the proof of it, and this is what has come from conference. But thank you for all of your comments so far.
Dan, Douglas, then Keith.
Thank you, Joe. First of all, the report is brilliant. I think it's really good to read. And as George was saying, they've always been good for the years, but it's getting so much better, and the interaction's brilliant there. I just wanted to say that I think everyone knows here, you know, it is sad for me as a Gillingham councillor to see that people are feeling unsafe and young people are feeling unsafe, and it's just not good enough. It's just not good enough. And Adrian, you mentioned about that revolving door. That revolving door's been going on a long time with the police commissioner here, right? Numbers have been dropping, and, you know, I'm going to use the Love Gillingham task force. The task force we've got now, we're involving young people. The police officers know who the young people are chatting. It's not just about all of us lot just getting in the room and changing the area. It's about hearing the voices of everybody in the community, and that is everybody. So I feel that we should learn something from that, and police are walking down the street and not just seeing a young person as a problem, but seeing them as part of a solution, and we need to be getting that into our mindset. And yes, of course I'm going to be talking about Gillingham, but Chatham is also an area of concern, and we need to be, you know, no one, including young people, should feel unsafe going down there. My only other comment, Joe, and Ailish, is around the mental health aspect. Obviously, with my other role on HASC, on the health committee, I think you're right, and I think access for young people has got better, the access into services have got better. Maybe the waiting lists have not improved, but we've also really got to look at parents, like your parents that might need that access to mental health support, which impacts the family. Because if they're waiting months to see somebody, the impact on young people in that household is tremendous, isn't it? Whether it's small or whether it's large, it's massive. And I feel there might be a piece of work or something that you need to look on that transition part around, yes, young people's accessibility into mental health services is better, and talking to someone sometimes, but is the problem also their family unit that's struggling? And I think, I know, Leanne, that's what we spoke about, that transition piece on health for adults and health for young people. But there is a clear piece, because mental health follows through in your life. It doesn't just disappear. So, yeah, but well done. It's a brilliant report. Well done.
We'll discuss some things about that in the work programme at the end, Dan. Thank you. Good point. Douglas.
Thank you very much. Just want to, first of all, can you hear me? Okay. Take two. Want to big up the young people for this report. All right, it's important that we use language that you guys understand as well. Right, so I can get down with the kids as well. I think it's a fantastic report, and it does hurt me when you speak about not feeling safe, and this collective anxiety is something that all of us as adults have to take extremely seriously. And thinking about interventions and what can we do, it's a shameful situation where you have to remind adults how to behave on the high street and in and around Medway. Just 2 weeks ago, a week ago, we were opening up the facilities at the Lido, the Strand, and I was mortified to hear today there's vandalism taking place on such a facility. So there's something that is deeply wrong with society. Young people, you're going to be adults tomorrow. So if you're not feeling safe on the high street, you're raising issues that mirror the work that Nashaba Khan, our MP for Gillingham, did with Love Gillingham, talking about what are the core issues, why people don't like being on the high street, cleanliness, not feeling safe, poor lighting. You just validated that. So we don't have a long time before young people like yourself become adults, and people not using the high street now, you won't use it when you get older. So all the hard work that we are doing will not really bear fruit. So just to underscore my colleagues' comments there, we have to do something about it. We need to be creative with the interventions, and I'm sure this report has to go far and wide, and we need to name and shame and really get enforcement of the police of safety prioritized. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
You agree, do you, Rose? Yeah, great. Okay, finally, Keith.
Thank you, Jo. It's just an illustration, actually, of one of the points you raised was about work experience. And I've had a couple of parents have come up to me to say that their youngsters with special needs had been doing work experience, and in fact one of them was actually taken on to do a job one day a week. But after 6 months of doing this job, they were dismissed because, not because they hadn't been doing the job properly, but because other schools needed some work experience. So I think that's something that perhaps you need to look into. It's a brilliant report, by the way. But that is an issue, and it relates to work experience. If the work experience placements lead on to a permanent job, then I think that's something that we need to be looking into.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Any other comments? No? Right, Vice Chair.
I move that the committee notes the report and requests a briefing note around access to work experience with the data breakdowns. And then I think there was another recommendation before that I've missed. Oh, it was around ensuring we find a way to close that feedback loop. That's it.
Is that seconded? Thank you, Dan. And agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Thank you so much, young people. Rose, do you want to come back, or Olivia? No? Okay. Thanks a lot then. Item number 7. So it's the council plan and performance monitoring strategic risk Q4, pages 95 to 150. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to go through this particularly. I'd rather members ask questions if they have anything specific. I think what I do need to acknowledge is it's a very mixed picture for children's. There's far more red there than I would like to see. However, you know, some of it, there's absolute indications that there is likely to be an upward trend. It's those performance indicators with the long downward tail that worry me slightly. However, you will see that, for example, the children in need figures are high. They will be because our child protection figures are lower. So there is some internal movement on this. But I have asked Kelly Cogger that she speaks to her senior leadership team about this, because we do need some concerted effort to try and turn this around. But I'm not going to say much more than that, other than to acknowledge a mixed picture in some areas, some good news in others.
Okay, questions? Okay. Adrian.
Thank you, Jo. Let's be frank, this is pretty awful, isn't it? It's a sea of red. The KPIs for delivering quality social care and community service, only 1 out of 9 is on target. And I think what is more concerning is that 5 of them are still on a downward thing. You know, and you go on from the KPIs for benefiting good education, quality jobs, etc. 2/3 of the KPIs are below target, and again, the direction of travel for most of them is downwards. When I was a portfolio, one of the jobs I had was to look at the council plan, and I used to have to take to task the various portfolio holders, not in public, you know, and But I think, it is the portfolio holders that have got to get a grip to this, because the buck stops with them. They're the ones who've got responsibilities for those areas, and it's patently clear from this that they're not taking those responsibilities seriously enough. And it is serious because we're dealing with the futures of our young people. I'm not going to rant on any longer, but all I'll say is I'm very disappointed.
Anybody else? Liz, then Mark.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, similar to Adrian, I'm sort of disappointed with the amount of red in this, and I just want to sort of appreciate there's, year on year, there seems to be an increase of demand to keep up with. I mean, my worry sort of, I think probably at the last budget was where we're sort of, obviously there's a big focus on adult social care as well, and there was obviously a lot of money put into that, and my concern was that we were going to sort of be focusing a lot more on adults and social care and taking our foot off the pedal a bit with children. Obviously, a heck of a lot of money has gone into children services over the years, and we've got out of that position with Ofsted that we did, and I just want to make sure we don't start going back into those special measures, which I'm surely you do as well. I guess another sort of focus is I'm looking at the education side of things, and I don't know whether it's just me sort of misunderstanding the wording of it, but there's a lot of, it mentions a lot about inclusive education, and I don't know whether that means mainstream and providing sort of SEN education with keeping within mainstream schools, and is that our sort of focus? Is that how we're sort of trying to move forward? And sort of children with EHCPs, are we sort of trying to keep them in mainstream where at all possible, and not using sort of specialist provisions? And that would be a concern, that with the downward trend of sort of education, that it could be that we're not providing the right provision for children. I've sort of been looking at some data recently, which doesn't appear within this. It's totally separate, but the number of children with EHCP seems to be going up and up. Yet the cost, the amount of money that we're spending has gone down considerably, like a lot, millions. And where that could be as a good thing, obviously we've got to protect finances. This is taxpayers' money. I'm just concerned that why, if the numbers are going up, how come we're managing to spend less and less? And the number of provisions that we're using is decreasing a lot as well. So I think that's just my concern about how we're managing sort of young people with EHCPs. Thank you.
Well, you're right, Liz. The aim is to have as many young people, children and young people with EHCPs in mainstream school wherever possible, and where it's appropriate. And obviously, we look at each individual to see whether they can, whether mainstream is right for them, or whether it's a resource provision within a mainstream school, or whether it's a special school. And then when it's if it's a special school, is it one of our own? Is that the most appropriate, or does it have to be something outside? Because not all of our special schools will be able to cater for all of our young people. So each one is taken individually. But the idea is that we will aim to be as inclusive through ensuring as many as possible are in mainstream provision. As far as the costings go, I'd have to look into that a bit more, because our costings are still quite high. A lot of the out-of-area placements are costing a huge amount of money. So there's a few children costing a lot of money. But what we are looking at with our in-house pricing is working with the schools to keep that a level playing field. So there's a lot of work going on, a lot of more work still to do. But I'm not into the detail to be able to give you a fully detailed answer on that.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Anybody else? Mark?
Nothing against Dan on this one, because I know he he fights for all health across Medway. But again, this report covers improving health and well-being for all. And as I said previously, the ICB should be here answering to us. And when you look at their reports, 2 of them have been read, and I can remember them being read when I used to sit on health and adult social care back in 2015 and 2019. And there's a load of amber, and we're not going to get any answers because they don't come to this, but they really should be here answering questions on outcomes for our children, because it's our responsibility as the Children and Young People Overview Scrutiny Committee to hold the ICB to account for their failings year on year on year for our children in Medway. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I'd already mentioned that Eilish and I, through Dan's other comment and from what the Young People's report said, we're going to talk about that in the work programme, but good point. Dan.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow on from that just quickly. You're right. I think, the ICB, but I know Leanne and us on HASC have said, and I've said to you, haven't I, I've even invited Children's along to that committee to give evidence, and I think we need to be doing a lot more of that. And maybe and look at how we influence the ICB in a better way.
Okay, anybody else? I mean, my take on it is the data does look horrific. The plan did start in 2024. We're 2025. There are too many reds. But, we've had 14 years of austerity. Things are turning. We're giving a cash boost to schools, free dinners, free breakfast clubs. We've had funding today regarding family hubs that are going to continue, Start for Life programmes, NHS, because, health is so important. It's getting 29 extra billion pounds. And obviously, the only way has got to be up with this. So I echo everything everyone said. So thank you for that. Vice Chair.
I love this. My 2 big things that I go on about, out of area placements and now sure starts, have both had a mention. But I moved the committee considered the Q4, 24 and 25 progress of the performance indicators used to monitor progress of the Council's priorities as set out in Appendix 1 to the report, and that we note the strategic risk summary as set out in Appendix 2 to the report.
Is that seconded? Thanks, Dan. And agreed? Thank you. And we're on to the work programme. So, Stephanie.
I'll start off very, very briefly. The work programme is just as set out. There is an item that does need to be added on there, which is a member request that was sent through by Councillor Joy for an item on independent schools. So we will be taking that at the August meeting as well.
I do not make any apologies for the 25% VAT on independent schools, because that's funding 93% of our population state provision. So, my heart doesn't bleed for that, I'm afraid.
I'm sorry, Joe, this party political broadcast is really one-sided. The facts are, as far as the economy is concerned, since July 24 and this month, inflation is up 1.3%, unemployment is up 0.5%, GDP growth is down 0.6%, our borrowing costs are up considerably, and our debt is up considerably. To hark on about the amount of borrowed money that has been thrown around to as a good thing for the economy is total rubbish, I'm sorry to say.
Thank you, that's your opinion. But actually, I bet we're talking about 10 or less than that children in Medway. Anyway, the work programmes, back to Stephanie.
I don't actually have anything to add, but I do believe Eilish wants to come in about the October meeting.
I had a meeting with Ailish and Teresa, and looking at where we were looking at in terms of health, we want to, in the October meeting, if that's possible, talk about a wider systematic approach to health and early intervention. And there are no head teachers here, I don't think, but we usually do have them on our panel. And we were wondering if we could perhaps use them as voluntary providers of maybe working in tandem to look at encompassing what our young people's youth council report has said, and in what our wider need is for Medway. So that was one proposal. The second proposal was regarding the point that Dan made about transition, you know, not in terms of if you do have a parent who's been affected with mental health, what's the impact on our 63,000 children? And I'm not saying that all parents have mental health, but what are the barriers there, and what can we be doing to seamlessly help the child living in that, but also support the parent kind of managing that, their own well-being. So that was two. And then the final thing was regarding looking to, we've got the young mayor, so we have the youth council for the older children and young people and young adults in Medway, and we've got the young mayor event, coming through for our Key Stage 2 children. We were was wondering if perhaps on consultation maybe from Head Teacher Forum or Governor Forum, that we on maybe a rolling programme, and this is from the conference that I attended with the Youth Council, that we ensure that we get a couple of representatives from different schools in Medway, so we get their perspective on coming to a meeting, so it's sort of opened up to be much more child-friendly. Opinions on that, please? George.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think that the work that Leanne's been spearheading on the Young Mayors programme and the administration's commitment to ensuring that it's funded externally, I think is a great piece of work. And I think, yeah, it'd be great to bring a variety of young people from across the borough to the committee. So, yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Thanks, George. Any comments on the...
Just thinking though, if we're doing Key Stage 2 coming to a committee, we may need to look at doing it a bit earlier on in the day.
I wasn't going to start with Key Stage 2, but that would be the next step. You're right.
Chair, Joe, it's only Steph won't never invite me back to this committee, but I think the thing around the health element and the mental health is something we could maybe take offline and do a double pre-agenda or something with opposition spokes, but also look at the ICB as well, because remember we wanted to talk about getting some witnesses with regards to young people in the ICB. So maybe we can have a chat, all of us, speak to Terry, Steph and us, Joe, and that, and the jobs. We can just do something offline and work it out how we do that, because I don't think we should let the ICB off the hook on this one.
Yeah, that was my final thing, holding the ICB to account. So we're going to have spokespeople offline. Yep. Who's going to lead that, Dan? Do you want me to? Stephanie. Okay, thank you. Any other addition to the work programme? Okay, thank you. Vice Chair.
I move that the committee notes the report and agrees the work programme as set out in Appendix 1 to the report, subject to accepting the proposed changes outlined in italic text on Appendix 1 and the the items as discussed and the offline chats and what comes out of those.
Seconded. Sharon, thank you. And agreed. Thank you all. Good night.